Hello and welcome to the Adventures of George Washington. I am your host, Professor Worthington. From childhood through adulthood, George Washington enjoyed learning about history. Since his ancestors came from Britain, he was particularly captivated by England's storied past. Most of his understanding of these events came from reading Tobias Smollett's A Complete History of England.
Today, I am going to read about the Protestant Reformation.
The accession of King Henry VII to the throne of England in 1485 ended the brutal Wars of the Roses between the royal houses of Lancaster and York and started the reign of the House of Tudor. When his son, Henry VIII, took over in 1509, he started a new conflict by igniting the Protestant Reformation in England. Fueled by German priest Martin Luther's bold challenge to the Catholic Church's religious doctrines and the Pope's political supremacy, the Protestant Reformation swept across Europe between 1517 and 1648. In England, Thomas Cromwell, a man who rose from working-class obscurity to serve as Henry VIII's principal advisor, became a key figure in the Reformation by mastering the art of turning religious disputes into political issues.
Seems to me there should be a separation between church and state.
Henry VIII's first wife was Catherine of Aragon, the widow of his older brother Arthur, who died of illness in 1502 when he was just 15 years old. By 1525, Henry and Catherine had only one child, a daughter named Mary. Henry, hoping for a male heir to continue the House of Tudor, and believing that the 40-year-old Catherine was beyond childbearing age, petitioned Pope Clement VII for an annulment of his marriage.
Nothing personal, babe. You still look good for an old lady, but I need a younger and hotter wife that can give me a son.
The Pope vehemently denied the king's request. It took years, but in a bold act of defiance against the Pope's explicit ban, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer finally annulled Henry's first marriage. Almost immediately, Henry wed 25-year-old Anne Boleyn in 1532. Enraged, the Pope struck back by excommunicating both the king and Cranmer from the Catholic Church. With unwavering loyalty to the Pope and her Catholic convictions, Catherine spent the rest of her life in England, steadfastly refusing to recognize Henry's marriage to Anne as valid. In retaliation for his excommunication, Henry VIII, backed by Parliament and Thomas Cromwell, severed England's ties to Rome and crowned himself supreme head of the new Church of England. As the young George Washington read about these events in Tobias Smollett's A Complete History of England, he would have been led to believe that the English people concurred heartily with the king and all his measures for abolishing the papal authority in this kingdom. In reality, devout Catholics clung to their faith. One such ardent Catholic, known as the Maid of Kent, was convinced the Holy Ghost had anointed her as a prophet and drifted from parish to parish in ecstatic trances, claiming to hear celestial music, to commune with Mary Magdalene, and to foretell that an unrepentant Henry would die the death of a villain within a month. According to Smollett, the king indulged her visions only until he could no longer tolerate them, ultimately ordering the execution of the maid and the priests who championed her prophecies. Personally, Henry favored neither the Catholic nor the Protestant belief systems, but rather, he used religion as a means to achieve his personal goals. He did not want the Pope to have political power in England, but he also feared the fanatical behavior of Cromwell and the Protestant reformers. Much of his political decision-making, including his marriages, was based on maintaining a balance between the two religions. Thus, in England, neither side could gain much ground on the other. The opinions and whims of the king were all that really mattered. For example, Parliament seized the vast estates and treasures of the Catholic Church, funneling them into the crown's coffers and fueling Henry's lavish appetites. In 1539, a 100-acre parcel in Sulgrave, Northamptonshire, once church property, was sold to Lawrence Washington, George Washington's fifth great-grandfather. A dedicated Tudor loyalist, Lawrence was already making his mark as the mayor of Northampton and a prosperous wool merchant.
Good old great-grandpa Lawrence. There was a man who knew the value of land.
The estate remained in the Washington family until the middle of the 17th century, when it was sold to another family, and George Washington's great-great-grandfather, John Washington, emigrated to Virginia.
What a great place for an immigrant to make a new life.
In 1533, Henry and Anne had their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth. After several miscarriages, Anne failed to give Henry his coveted male heir. As a result, Henry started having an affair with one of the Queen's attendants named Jane Seymour. He wanted to divorce Anne, but feared that his enemies would then claim that his marriage to Catherine was still legal. In January of 1536, Catherine died, and before the end of the year, Henry accused Anne of adultery with multiple men and incest with her brother George, and on the 19th of May, 1536, he had her executed. The day after Anne's execution, Henry became engaged to 28-year-old Jane Seymour, and 10 days later they wed. In October of 1537, she gave birth to the king's first male heir, Edward, only to succumb to complications and die within 2 weeks of his arrival.
Hooray, my dynasty will last forever.
In 1539, Thomas Cromwell suggested that the 49-year-old Henry should marry the 25-year-old German princess, Anne of Cleves. Anne was the sister of the Duke of Saxony, the leader of a military alliance of Lutheran principalities and cities within the Roman Empire. Cromwell hoped the union would help to advance the Protestant Reformation in England. Henry went along with the marriage, believing it would help to minimize the Pope's influence in England. On January 1st of 1540, Henry met Anne for the first time, and he was not impressed by her looks, intelligence, nor demeanor.
She's just not my type. You know, she's just not that pretty. Frankly, I know you're going to say it's a terrible thing to say, but I just couldn't have sex with her. She could never be the chosen one.
However, not wanting to make an enemy of the Duke of Saxony, Henry went through with the plans and married Anne on January 6, 1540. This marked a turning point in the relationship between the king and Cromwell, which Cromwell's enemies took advantage of. The gentry class, who considered Cromwell to be an undeserving upstart, the Roman Catholics, who considered him to be an enemy to their religion, and the Protestants who feared his radical ideas, all conspired to accuse Cromwell of treason. Whether the king believed the accusation or not, he was convinced that sacrificing Cromwell would appease the majority of his subjects and help him to maintain the balance between the Protestant and Catholic religions. On June 10, 1540, 6 months after the marriage of Henry and Anne, Thomas Cromwell was beheaded.
We must release the Cromwell files.
What about the lewd picture the king sent to Cromwell?
The king claims he didn't send it. He doesn't know how to draw.
But it has his signature on it.
He says he doesn't know how to write his name either.
Does he really expect the public to believe that?
His supporters will believe anything he tells them.
On the same day that Cromwell was executed, Henry was granted a divorce from Anne, and his attention immediately turned to the 17-year-old Catherine Howard, a first cousin of his second wife, Anne Boleyn.
Wow, she is hot. If she weren't underage, I would bang. Oh, who am I kidding? Everyone knows that I have no standards.
Less than a month later, they were married. About a year after the marriage, Henry decided to convince his nephew James, the King of Scotland, to forsake Catholicism for Protestantism. They agreed to meet in the English city of York. When James failed to show up for the meeting, Henry was disappointed, but not as disappointed as he would be upon his arrival back in London. He returned to rumors that Queen Catherine had engaged in multiple carnal relationships both before and after her marriage. She admitted to the relationships before the marriage, but claimed to have been faithful since then. Nonetheless, Henry had Catherine and her accused lovers beheaded in February of 1542. In July 1543, Henry took Catherine Parr as his sixth and final queen. Weakened by years of physical strain and the weight of his own ambitions, his vitality began to fade. On January 28, 1547, at the age of 55, the king died, passing the crown to his 9-year-old son, Edward VI, and closing the chapter on a reign that forever reshaped England.
Wow. It's astonishing how foolish people were back then. I can't imagine living in a time when people support a ruler like King Henry VIII.
Thank you for watching. If you found the content useful or entertaining, please subscribe. Please see this video's description for additional information, including a list of references.